Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 304 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. It's raining again. The bees don't like it, I certainly don't like it, and I'm desperate to settle into a regular inspection routine. We're splitting colonies in preparation for new queen introductions and thinking about the summer nectar flow that's heading our way. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is sponsored in part by Modern Beekeeping, suppliers of general beekeeping equipment, including high-density polyhives. These include Paradise National hives, Swenty polyhives, and of course Honeypore hives, my particular favourite. More than this, Modern Beekeeping also supply traditional cedar and pine hives, a range of very effective bee feeds called Appy Mix and Appy Pasta, and a full range of all the must-have beekeeping equipment for every beekeeper. For all your beekeeping needs, contact Paul at Modern Beekeeping by visiting their website www.modernbeekeeping.co.uk. Hi everyone, another very damp podcast for you all with more rain and very limited amounts of warm sunshine to bring any of us some weather cheer. I've been looking at how this spring has been in terms of rainfall and sunshine. A picture, if you will, a set of old balance scales with rain on one side and sunshine on the other. Inevitably, more rain means less sunshine. Steph has an expression for that, but I can't really repeat it here. Suffice to say, it translates into stating the very obvious. More rain means more clouds, which means less sunshine. Obvious, right? As luck would have it, I discovered on the BBC website today an article by weatherman Chris Fawkes talking about the spring weather we've just had to put up with. It seems March was wet. This year, ranking in the top 20% of wettest Marches ever. April, drumroll please, was even wetter and comes in at number 6 on the all-time wettest Aprils in the last 189 years. Oh, and not to be outdone, May is looking likely to also peak in the above-average levels of rainfall category. No wonder our poor old bees have had it hard this spring, not to mention us beekeepers. It looks like the finger is being pointed firmly in the direction of climate change, as the monthly temperatures for March, April and May have all been above average. Our weatherman goes on to explain that warmer temperatures mean that for every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, there's a corresponding 7% increase in moisture in the atmosphere. Probably means this type of seasonal weather pattern could become a regular occurrence. Not that I'm in any way qualified to make such a bold statement, but it would seem reasonable to assume, unless we do something drastically different, we're going to keep getting weather patterns similar to this year. But how's that going to affect our bees? Well, the good news is warmer winters mean fewer colonies collapsing through severe cold, perhaps, but it also means potentially more pests and diseases surviving for the very same reason. There might be some good news for all of us who suffer from green woodpecker attacks on our hives. Warmer conditions make it easier for woodpeckers to dig into the ground in search of food. So our hives may not be targeted quite so quickly. Honestly, I think the bees will cope well with these changes, but it's likely to be in the spring that we may suffer from similar starvation issues as a lot of beekeepers found this spring. Something to bear in mind later in the year perhaps, and for another podcast. I, for one, haven't been getting out to inspect a great deal, mostly due to the weather, to be fair. I sat in the truck for nearly 2 hours, waiting for the rain to stop, finally gave up and headed back to the office to catch up on some social media posts. we do have quite a large number of colonies with new or virgin queens in them, and here patience has to be the order of the day. The upshot of this is we don't have hundreds of colonies to have to check, and it's made life a little bit easier. Just until these new queens start laying, that is. Then we'll be back onto full days of inspecting, as long as the weather plays ball. Next week should see new queens arriving from Northumberland honey. Preparations for those will take place earlier in the week, with setting up queenless nukes ready to take the caged queens. Some of these nukes are going to be set up for the borage at the end of June, so just 4 weeks away really. These will necessarily need more frames of sealed brood than nukes being split off, ready to simply spend the summer building up and not designed for honey production this year. I posted a video recently showing a double brood colony. Lots of very nice new frames of drawn comb ready to be split. Unfortunately, we don't have a laying queen in this colony right now, so the best we can hope for with this colony is splits that will be ready for the heather honey trip at the end of July. That gives any newly introduced queen 8 weeks or thereabout to fill frame upon frame with eggs that should go on to boost the colony's strength and have plenty of bees ready to go north. Other colonies ready to split have upwards of 8 to 10 frames of brood. These will form the basis of our borage and pumpkin stocks. These will also be split and have around 5 frames of brood, hopefully mostly emerging but certainly capped brood. A 5-frame nuke taken from these colonies that has 3 or 4 frames of capped brood will be full of adult bees within a couple of weeks, ready to look after more brood, and at full strength by the time the borage is in full flower, as long as this weather starts to warm up a little, please. I have 2 colonies that are, well, I guess the only way to describe them is vicious. It seems all I have to do is look at them and they try to chase me away. These are going to be tricky, but destined to be split hard. I say tricky, what I really mean is painful. When you're dealing with these types of hives, let's be honest here, the ones that sting for no good reason at all, the really nasty ones where you know the best course of action is to destroy the queen, but it gives you a cold sweat thinking about how on earth you're going to find her while you have 100 angry workers pinging off your veil, especially when one of them clings onto the veil nearest your ear and it sounds like it's in your bee suit. It just has to happen, so next week it will be split down. Oh, the funny part about it, well, funny for you guys, is it's a double brood with supers on too, so it's going to be tricky to say the least, but has to be done. I'm thinking maybe 6 3-frame nukes. This will give me the best chance of spotting the queen. Let me explain. I'm not actually going to look for the queen while I'm splitting this colony. They're just too nasty. I'm going to take brood frames out and put them into nukes, seal them up, leave 1 nuke behind to catch any flying bees that return to the original hive position, and take the rest away to another location. Leave them for a day or so, then go through them one at a time to find the queen. A much easier task doing it this way than as a full-size colony, biting at my veil, so to speak. It's a challenge for sure, but we'll get through it one way or another. Over at the fishing lakes apiaries, I've seen quite a number of brambles starting to flower. I would say it's early, but I think these are varieties that always flower a little earlier than the bulk of the plants that line the river and lakes. It's always been a productive location for our colonies and delivers a delicious fruity honey that to me just tastes of summer berries. The trick now is to get a super on each of these colonies that has enough foragers so that we don't miss any early nectar flow. The first flush of summer nectar tends to be a little hit and miss, but once we get the warmer days and, as important, warmer nights, our colonies will be out en masse foraging and storing honey. So here's my current position with approximate numbers and I suppose a plan update for you all so I can explain where our beekeeping is heading at the moment, with the early summer period now upon us. We've completed all of our direct sales of colonies and reduced the total number of active production colonies. I have a number of shook swarm colonies going to another mainstream supplier who wanted bees on their own frames, and hopefully we'll get those away this week. Interestingly and incredibly frustratingly, the cooler weather conditions have coincided with the end of the spring nectar flow, and several queens have either gone off-lay or have slowed significantly. These, of course, are mostly in the shook swarm colonies, and more than likely as a result of the combined shook swarm process, the weather, and the slowdown of available forage. We'll be out next week checking in on these colonies, and I'll hopefully have them away by the end of next week, or at the very latest the following week. We have new queens arriving this week, and we'll look to introduce them in various ways towards the end of the week into splits that we're a little bit late in making. I normally like to give splits a week to throw up any emergency queen cells they can, so that I can remove these and make the newly created nukes hopelessly queenless. That means they're no longer able to produce queen cells themselves and more readily willing to accept a newly introduced queen. The plan is to have 50 colonies ready with new queens installed for the borage and heather. The new colonies for the heather will stay at the fishing lakes to develop this year, rather than taking them to the borage as well. The borage is a hard crop for the bees. The spiky leaves and stems shred the wings of the foraging bees and leaves the colonies depleted of strong foragers for that trip to the heather. So the plan is to set up these new colonies at the queen rearing apiary to forage blackberry, and also to take some to our allotments apiary, where they also have a wide area of forage available to them. This apiary site is also close to the river on the other side of our city. Nectar-rich plants are able to dangle their roots into the river and stay hydrated. Not that any plants should be short of a drink this year, given the huge amount of rainfall we've had. Just thinking back to the new queen colonies we're setting up, I wanted to explain the time frame that I hope we can look to in order to have plenty of foraging bees for the main summer flow. Queens going into hives this week should be released by next weekend and hopefully start laying early the following week. Provided I give them room to lay eggs unhindered, these new queens should start laying frame upon frame of eggs, and with any luck by the end of that first week have a couple of frames filled with eggs and brood. A Langstroth frame can hold over 6,000 eggs, but that would be almost all brood. Realistically, I would say somewhere around 60 to 70% would be closer to the mark. That could be something around 4,000 to 5,000 brood cells in use for worker brood. By the end of the second week, I would hope to have another couple of frames fully loaded with brood. Hold that thought for a moment. We need 21 days for those eggs to emerge as adult bees, and so, if we fast forward 21 days, that's going to be the first week of July, and the borage should be close to full production. No time to waste then this week, or we could miss that vital window. It's not quite so critical with the heather honey colonies. We won't be taking those to the moors until late July. Yet, if we want to grab a little summer blackberry honey from these colonies, here too we need to get cracking. This month sees midsummer, the 21st of June. It feels like our season has only just gotten started, and yet here we are, fast approaching the summer solstice. I think I said something very similar last year. So far this season, it's been a bit stop-start, but with lots of behind-the-scenes work happening at the unit, I've been kept busy as usual. We're almost ready for the big reveal of this latest project, so do look out for the video in the next week or two. So for me, I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks looking at the year planner whilst keeping one eye on the skies, crossing my fingers and hoping for some settled weather. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.